Welcome back, everyone, to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going to be diving into the world of EDCs,
Okay.
or endocrine-disrupting chemicals,
Yeah.
as they're commonly called. We got a request from a listener to do a rundown on EDCs.
Right.
And to do that, we are using as our source material the 2009
Uh-huh.
scientific statement from the Endocrine Society.
Okay, cool.
It's a really fascinating area,
Yeah.
but also kind of concerning, as we'll see.
Uh-huh.
So basically, our mission in this deep dive is to uncover exactly what EDCs are, how they work, and how they might be affecting our health.
Yeah, this is interesting stuff. EDCs aren't just some obscure scientific concept.
Right.
They're literally everywhere. And the scary part is you're likely exposed to them every single day.
Oh, great.
Yeah, so EDCs are natural or synthetic compounds that interfere with our hormones.
Okay.
And they do this in so many ways. They can mimic hormones, they can block them, mess with their production, even change how they break down in the body.
So it's not just like,
It's pretty disruptive.
one thing going wrong, it can really
Yeah.
throw a wrench in the whole system.
Exactly.
So give me some examples of these EDCs that I'm supposedly running into every day.
Well, think about those old industrial chemicals like PCBs.
Okay.
They were used in things like coolants and electrical insulation, but they were banned in the US in the 1970s. But here's the thing, they stick around in the environment, and we can still be exposed to them.
So they're like the unwelcome house guest that never leaves.
Exactly. Then we have plastics and those plasticizers
Okay.
that make them bendy and useful.
Right.
BPA is a big one you'll find that in. Food containers receipts.
Uh-huh.
Then there are phthalates. You find those in everything from toys to cosmetics.
Oh, great. So it's not just like industrial waste. It's in everyday stuff, too.
Right.
I'm guessing pesticides are on the list.
You bet. DDT, which was widely used to control insects but now is banned in many countries, is a
Right.
prime example. Then you have pharmaceutical agents. Things like DES, a synthetic estrogen that was prescribed to pregnant women in the mid-20th century, and unfortunately caused serious health problems for their children.
Whoa.
And believe it or not, even some natural substances in food can act as EDCs.
Hold on, you mean like healthy food?
Yes, things like phytoestrogens, which are found naturally in plants, particularly soy. While they're generally considered safe, they do have estrogenic effects on the body.
So EDCs are everywhere.
They're everywhere.
But how do they actually mess with our hormones?
Well, think of them as tiny, sneaky imposters. They can bind to hormone receptors in our cells, pretending to be the real deal.
Uh-huh.
This can either trick the body into thinking it's getting a signal when it isn't, or it can block the actual hormone from doing its job.
So like a key that fits the lock but doesn't actually open the door?
Yeah,
Or one that blocks the real key from getting in?
that's a great analogy. And they can also disrupt the actual production of hormones. Think of it like throwing a wrench into the machinery of hormone synthesis. And on top of that, they can mess with how hormones are transported throughout the body, or even how quickly they're broken down.
So they can cause a lot of havoc in a lot of different ways.
Exactly. And to make things even more complicated, there are these critical windows of vulnerability,
Okay.
periods in our lives when we're extra susceptible to the effects of EDCs.
Windows of vulnerability, that sounds a bit ominous.
Well, think about periods of rapid development, like fetal development or puberty.
Okay.
Hormones are basically running the show during these times, orchestrating all these crucial changes. Any disruption during these critical periods can have a domino effect on health. That can last a lifetime.
So exposure at these times is particularly concerning.
It is.
What about the effects on our health overall? What are the biggest risks we're looking at here?
Well, the health effects of EDCs are pretty broad, and they can depend on a few things, like which hormone system is being disrupted and when that exposure happens.
Yeah.
But the most talked about area is probably reproductive health.
That's definitely something I've heard a lot about.
Yeah, and rightfully so. In males, EDCs have been linked to things like reduced semen quality and fertility, and even an increased risk of testicular cancer.
And what about the effects on women?
Well, in women, they've been linked to a whole range of issues, from early puberty and irregular periods to conditions like endometriosis and an increased risk of breast cancer.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
a lot to consider.
It is, yeah.
And, we talked about this a little bit earlier, but the idea that these chemicals can have effects that last for generations.
Right.
It's pretty mind-blowing. Can you talk a little more about those transgenerational effects?
Absolutely. It's a fascinating and concerning area of research. Essentially, what we're learning is that exposure to EDCs in one generation can actually have consequences for future generations.
So you're saying that something my grandmother was exposed to Could affect my health today. That's
Yeah.
wild. How does that even work?
It all comes down to something called epigenetic changes.
Okay.
Think of it like this. Your genes are the hardware, and epigenetics is the software that tells them how to run.
Hmm.
EDCs can actually alter the software, changing how genes are expressed or turned on and off, without changing the underlying DNA sequence itself.
So it's like flipping a switch that changes how the genes behave.
Exactly. And the implications of this are huge.
Yeah.
It means that EDC exposure can leave a lasting mark on our genetic legacy, potentially influencing the health of generations to come.
That's both fascinating and a bit terrifying. It really shifts our perspective on EDCs from just a personal health issue to a much broader, multi-generational one.
Precisely. And it's important to remember that the reproductive system isn't the only one affected by these chemicals.
Okay.
They can also have significant impacts on other systems, like the thyroid.
The thyroid, what do EDCs have to do with that little gland in our neck?
Well, the thyroid plays a crucial role in regulating our metabolism growth and even brain development. And it turns out that EDCs can interfere with its delicate balance.
Oh no, not my thyroid. Tell me it's not as bad as it sounds.
Unfortunately, it can be quite serious. EDCs can mess with the production, transport, and action of thyroid hormones, essentially disrupting the whole system. One way they do this is by interfering with the way the thyroid gland takes in iodine, which is essential for making those hormones.
So they're basically cutting off the supply chain for those essential hormones.
Exactly. And this can be especially concerning for infants who are particularly vulnerable to thyroid hormone imbalances.
Yikes, this is getting a little overwhelming. Are there any other systems EDCs can affect?
You know, EDCs don't stop there. They can also affect brain development and have been linked to neurodevelopmental disorders like ADHD and autism. And then there's the impact on metabolism and energy balance, contributing to the rising rates of obesity, type 2 diabetes, and cardiovascular disease.
Wow, so they really can affect pretty much everything. It sounds like EDCs are working overtime to undermine our health. Is there anything they don't mess with?
Well, hopefully our minds are still safe.
Yeah.
But in all seriousness, the research on EDCs is constantly evolving, and we're still uncovering the full extent of their impact. What we do know is that these chemicals are pervasive in our environment and can affect a wide range of biological processes. That's why it's crucial to be aware of the risks and take steps to minimize exposure.
It's a lot to take in.
Yeah.
But it sounds like being informed is the first step to protecting ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So we've talked about these widespread effects of EDCs, but it sounds like studying them is a real challenge.
Yeah, it is.
What makes it so difficult to pin down exactly how they're affecting us?
Well, one of the biggest challenges is that the effects of EDC exposure can be delayed.
Oh, okay.
It might take years, even decades, for those effects to become noticeable.
Oh, wow. So it's like a ticking time bomb.
Exactly.
You might not even know you've been affected until much later.
Right.
And then there's the fact that
Yeah.
we're not exposed to just one EDC at a time.
Right.
We encounter a mix of these chemicals throughout our lives, making it nearly impossible to isolate the effects of any single one.
Yeah, it's like trying to figure out which ingredient in a complex recipe is causing a specific flavor.
It sounds like a real scientific puzzle.
It is.
Are there any other factors that complicate the research?
Yeah, there's one more big one, and it's a bit counterintuitive.
Okay.
You see, we often assume that higher exposure to something harmful means worse effects.
Right.
But with EDCs, it's not always so straightforward.
Wow.
Sometimes even low doses can have a significant impact.
Wow. So how do we protect ourselves if it's so hard to even study these things?
Right.
That's where this precautionary principle comes in, right?
Exactly. The precautionary principle is all about taking steps to reduce our exposure to potential hazards, even if we don't have absolute proof of harm.
Okay.
It's about minimizing risk, particularly when it comes to something as widespread and potentially harmful as EDCs.
So what can we actually do to reduce our exposure to these EDCs?
Well, there are a lot of simple changes we can make in our everyday lives.
Okay.
For example, choosing fresh whole foods over processed ones whenever possible. Processed foods often come in packaging that contains EDCs, and they might even have EDCs added during processing.
Okay, so more home-cooked meals and fewer packaged snacks.
Exactly.
I can definitely get behind that. What about all the plastic in our lives?
That's a big one. Try to limit your use of plastics, especially for food storage and preparation.
Mm-hmm.
Glass or stainless steel containers are great alternatives. And avoid heating food in plastic containers, as heat can cause those EDCs to leach into your food.
Okay, so ditch the plastic wrap and Tupperware, got it.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Filtering your water can help remove EDCs that might be lurking in your tap water. And when you're shopping for personal care products, Look for fragrance-free and paraben-free options. Fragrances and parabens can often contain those hormone-disrupting chemicals.
So this is a lot to keep in mind. But it's empowering to know that there are things we can do to protect ourselves.
Absolutely. Even small changes in our daily habits can add up to make a big difference in reducing our exposure to these EDCs.
That's great advice. So there you have it, our deep dive into the world of EDCs. It's a complex topic, but knowledge is power.
And remember, we can make choices that protect our health and the health of future generations.
Well said. If you're interested in learning more, the full scientific statement from the Endocrine Society is a great resource. And until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay healthy.